The Boston real estate market has been transformed fairly significantly over the last 20 years. Boston had largely been a low-rise city, starting probably 15 or 20 years ago with the seaport and other areas within Boston. High-rise construction has become more commonplace. There's been a commitment to attracting business to Massachusetts. There's been a commitment to creating the infrastructure with the seaport in other areas from the city to foster research and development, and especially in the life science area. So it's been a fantastic transformation of Boston and Massachusetts over the last 15 to 20 years.
Welcome to Boston Real Estate Times. Our guest today is Michael Scott. He is co-managing partner at Nutter and also a premier commercial real estate attorney in Boston. We are going to talk to him about what happens if the real estate market melts down, what should landlords and tenants do, plus MBTA communities and Massachusetts energy codes. Michael, welcome to our studio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. So let's first start that you have so much experience in commercial real estate, whether it's a development, acquisition, whatever, any aspect of commercial real estate. Question to you is, if there is a meltdown in commercial real estate in the market today or tomorrow, what is your advice to landlords and then to tenants?
Yeah. Well, the last couple of years, we've seen already some dislocations in the real estate market. I'm not anticipating a meltdown per se. I think a lot of landlords and building owners have been making adjustments to the current environment. Obviously, COVID was a huge part of it in terms of work from home, but also that's been compounded by interest rates increasing quite significantly since 2022, and construction costs being elevated for some period of time. So there's been a confluence of events, and I think the landlords and building owners in Boston in particular, in the surrounding area, have adapted quite well. It's pretty clear that they are taking efforts to enhance the tenant experience. And so if there is a meltdown, real estate's all about relationships. It's making sure, obviously, that you have enough capital to sustain a meltdown or a blow-up.
Correction.
Yes, a correction, if you will. But again, it's relationships with your lenders, with your equity sources, making sure they see your vision for where you want to go longer term. And it's also your commitment to the experience with your tenants, because after all, they're your customers. And if you put them first and foremost, people understand the difference between high touch, quality customer service versus one that lacks that component.
Very good. Now, coming back to MBTA communities.
Sure.
So any neighborhood, any city, town in Massachusetts has any connection with commuter rail MBTA, they are required by law to do something to build the commuter-friendly multifamilies. There is also, it brings some opportunity to developers and potential investors, but also there is a lot of resistance from the local community that we don't want a skyscraper or 10-story building in our old sleepy neighborhood. So what are some of the legalities or legal issues can come up, and what is your advice on that?
Yeah. Well, number one, I'd like to say that I'm fully supportive of the MBTA Communities Act. I think Charlie Baker worked very hard to get that passed for a number of years. You see that it's critically important for us with the dearth of housing that's been created over the last 30 or 40 years, that there needs to be a component, an enhancement, an incentive for us to be building more units. I know that some towns are resistant to it. I personally involved with a lot of transit-oriented development and have overcome many of those objections by communities. But transit stations are a perfect place for housing and other lifestyle components. And I think the developments that have been done over the last 6 to 10 years have demonstrated that you can create a great sense of place for both living as well as work and for play around transit that doesn't create congestion. And I think it's something that people need to see the bigger picture to have that come together and recognize that for us to have a sustainable, vibrant economy in Massachusetts, housing is critically important.
It's very important. Of course, we are running sort of always. I have been in Boston since 1992, and every year the same story: there is no housing. There is no housing, and now this is one of the very tough time to really find a good housing.
Yeah. I don't think you're ever going to overcome that component of resistance, but I think this is a good start where the state is being an active participant in helping get these products off the ground. Obviously, with the MBTA Communities Act, you have an enhancement in terms of being able to be eligible for some state funding for infrastructure and other improvements to make the project viable, and that's critically important. I think that theme is going to be even more important where the state, put it this way, the public sector and the private sector need to come together to solve some pretty difficult problems right now. We've been talking to a number of different public entities, whether it's mayors of larger cities or the folks who are running towns, and they ask, well, why can't we get more housing production? And part of it is that the costs are just prohibitive right now with interest rates and construction costs, and people don't understand that some of these large multifamily developments, there is, given the current climate, property value is a negative value from a development perspective. And so how do you overcome that? You overcome that by, partnering with the public sector to contribute, which is really towards a common goal of having more housing. I think it's proven that you can't always put it on the private sector to solve some of these goals. And so whether it's tax abatement programs, state incentive programs, grants for infrastructure improvement, the MBTA Communities Act is all part of, I think, that larger discussion about getting housing built and developed in the state of Massachusetts.
Now, another issue is the energy codes. Now, the energy codes are, MBTA Act is confined only to the neighborhoods and towns which have the MBTA commuter rail, but the new energy codes are applicable to all the neighborhoods, municipalities, and towns and cities across Massachusetts. Of course, it means that the cost for the developers or investors is going to go up because they have to follow those codes. Have you come across any legal issues or legal challenges in that energy codes area?
Not really. I think people understand that incrementally we should be building in greater efficiencies into the buildings. And I think in the first instance, some developers were concerned about the additional costs, but I think those costs have been absorbed for the most part. And I haven't seen necessarily any legal challenges per se that have really been a substantive barrier to continuing to employ climate resiliency into the design of buildings.
Now, Michael, given the current real estate realities, both in terms of demand for housing, interest rates, MBTA Act, and energy codes, can Boston be complacent in the future? What Boston should be doing right now, and not only Boston, but also real estate players like developers, attorneys like you, general contractors, engineers, architects.
We cannot be complacent. We've had great success, but that requires effort and attention, and it requires people to be clinical about how we go forward with thinking about the state of our economy and where we want to see Boston go into the future. I think there needs to be collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, including the residents and others who are living in the city, about where common and shared goals for the city, at the same time maintaining a strong economic base for the city of Boston. I think there has to be clear expectations for development, so that developers are attracted to come to Boston as they have the last 15 to 20 years. And that means, some more certainty around permitting and giving them certainty about the investment of soft costs will lead to a reasonable return on that investment. And so the more certainty we can provide, the better. I think other issues that are facing us right now is the cost. The cost of land, the cost of construction, interest rates right now are significantly impacting the ability to have projects come out of the ground and be developed. And so I think there is a continued role for partnership between public and the private, understanding each other's needs, really rolling up your sleeves and figuring out how best to get some of these projects done, and a sharing of some of the burden between the private and public sector, while taking into account and satisfying the needs and desires of everybody who inhabits the city.